So Ishmael, you mentioned about the mass market. Can you be more specific?
So as a easy guideline, you can estimate in Klang Valley, those household income between 3,500 to 10,000 ringgit will consist of the mass market. So as you can see, a lot of people actually fall within this income bracket. And you have government initiative like Prima coming up with a lot of affordable housing to cater for this income bracket because there is not enough supply. So that's why I say just now, if you looking for property, you want to look for this type of price range that cater to these people.
So you mentioned about like people who buy the house, they will be worried about when you get a key and the price goes down. So that will only happen while oversupply, right? Is there any like which kind of property we should avoid that might have the risk of being oversupplied?
This is a common question that a lot of people always ask themselves, and also I get asked this question a lot. So of course, naturally, when you talk about properties that will face oversupply risk, are perhaps those property that are heavily invested by investors. So you see mainly are investors, not own users. So you want to look for properties that you yourself, when you buy, you see the size, for example, is not too small. So you don't want anything below like 600 square foot. It gets a bit cramped unless it really has a lot of infra supporting and whatnot. But generally speaking, you don't want too small. You don't want properties too expensive, you cannot get back your return. So these are the things to look out for when you talk about property investment.
So when you talk about the size, it is because usually the smaller size are only for renting out, like for expatriates or for your own use, like people are not really getting married. I mean, the marriage rates goes down, so they're looking for like a studio. But is that something that you should avoid as well?
So actually, when you talk about sizes, property size, it's a global phenomenon where every developed country, you will see land is scarce, you will see property sizes getting smaller and smaller. So as property investor, you have to be very selective. If you are talking about smaller size, can I deal, can I live in such property, or can I raise a family? It's also important is when I mention supporting infra, where you have MRT, where you have good access highways that support these properties, because living in it is one thing, you also want to be able to staying there, go to where you work. So it's very important. If it's not practical, then there's no take up for those property. So it's not just about size, it's about your infra as well.
And usually if the place is with good infras, which also means the price is higher. So is it not so affordable then?
This is the catch-22 situation. So normally youngsters like myself, like yourself, a lot of my friends, they will ask me, so Ishmael, now I have a dilemma. I have two options. Do I sacrifice in terms of space, that means get a smaller property, live closer to city, or do I get something much bigger but much further out? So this is always the question that people toy between. Which one do I get? Now, my normal answer to these young working adults, I say if your career trajectory is very good, that means you are looking for promotions, higher income in the near future, try to be as close as possible to the city. Why? Because as close as possible to the city, that's where the opportunity is. Your work, your business opportunity. So like me, yourself, I'm sure you try to be as close as possible to the city. Now, not everyone will have the luxury to be close to the city. So either you look for good highways, or for our context now, we are looking at MRTs. So maybe I elaborate a bit on the MRT. In 2011, MRT1 was announced and it was made public information. So everyone knew about MRT back in 2011. Fast forward a few years, now we are in 2017. Our MRT1 has already been completed, finally completed, and people are actually commuting from their house to their workplace through MRT. but we will have to see more of this trend. A lot of people are still very used to their car, but eventually they'll switch to public transport.
So you mentioned about the MRT, and I know that Hutchinson Research had published 13 books with the research and the analysis about the neighboring countries on how the infrastructure and also the public transportation changed the property market. So how do you see Kuala Lumpur in the future in the property market?
So if you compare to more advanced economies, for example, South Korea, talk about Seoul, then you go to Japan, then you talk about Hong Kong, you even talk about our neighbor Singapore. One common denominator is that the rich, the wealthy, they all use public transportation and mainly rail-based, that means MRT, LRT. As I mentioned earlier, our country, we just saw our completion of our first MRT. Now, it's not yet really the way of life for us to travel to work perhaps using MRT. Most of us still use car. But if you look at all these neighboring countries, it's a norm, it's a way of life to use MRT. Now, when people start to realize that this is the way to go, because you don't want to be wasting time on the road, it's more efficient to use rail-based infrastructure, and it becomes a norm. Eventually, now not yet perhaps, eventually it becomes. So people will start to value those property that have access to all this MRT, LRT is very convenient. So expect in the future, you can see Malaysians in Greater KL as well to really value properties with MRT access, LRT access. Now what's exciting on top of that is that I mentioned we only had our first MRT completed. We have our MRT2 under construction, and then you have MRT3 in the pipeline, planning. So some people don't know, in fact most people still don't know where are the alignment of MRT3. Now it's very exciting to actually see the alignment. For example, as a research house, of course we would know, where they would then interchange with MRT1, for example. So MRT3, you have interchange station as well, obviously, with MRT1, MRT2. So as property investors, all this information can be very valuable as well.